We are going to start talking about assignment 2, and then we're going to go on and talk about assignment 3 and any questions you have there. Then we're going to go over today's topic, which is communication and risk. We're going to briefly touch on what's going to happen next week. And then last but not least, I'm going to open it for office hours for those that have questions. And I can take you out to another room and moderate those. That's fine. Okay. So assignment 2, I know there have been some issues that have come up, and there's been some questions. And to be honest, in seeing what the overall class average was, the actual class average was over 80%. So many of you did very well. Some of you did not do as well. And so let's talk about what those differentiating factors are. I'm just going to fix my camera. Okay. So assignment 2, if you guys want to open it in Canvas, I'm going to go point for point over some of the comments that I got from you guys in terms of grading that you didn't think were fair. So many people said to me, I didn't know we had to describe a project name. We talked about describing the project name in class. And what did I say? Can somebody tell me what I said about what your project name should be in terms of what should be included in it? That's right, Isaac. It should be specific, right? It should describe what your project is doing. So somebody give me an example of their project and then I want you to tell me an example of one that would be specific and one that wouldn't be. Ricardo, unmute yourself. Talk to us, buddy.
Hello.
Oh.
How y'all doing?
We're doing good today. Okay, so Ricardo, what project are you working on?
GDW.
Okay.
This game that we call Boomerangers.
Okay, so
Boomerangs.
So if you were going to give me a project title that wasn't specific, what would you call it?
GDW game.
There you go. Now, because you're awesome, right? You're going to tell me what did you actually call it because you knew the project name had to be kind of specific.
I called it Boomerangers GDW game, but that was not also specific, so.
Yeah, so I would have liked to have seen something related to the game a little bit more, right? If, like, for instance, I saw some of the ones with the adult tech, and they literally just called it adult tech. Well, you know what? My laptop technically is adult tech. So something like tech drive for older adults would have been something that was a little bit more specific to tell you what you're doing. So we want something in that title that's specific to the project, okay? And so many of you might have lost a little bit there. I think Tony and Isra were both pretty forgiving on that one, so you might have lost a mark, but you probably didn't lose a lot of marks, okay? The next one was the problem statement. What is a problem statement? What should have been included in your problem statement? There was one in particular point that was brought up as that should be part of the problem statement. Well, you identify, the problem or the pain point, right? So when you have your goals are trying to fix that thing, but the problem statement is what is wrong or what is missing right now. And many of you didn't differentiate that, or you just talked in general about what the project was about, not what the problem was with it. So if it's something where, we're getting in, we need to get analytics, well, what are those, like, what don't we know? Because we can go and get analytics on anything. I can get analytics on how many people entered into Google Meet today, but that's not going to tell me why Google Meet is slow for me, right? I mean, it could be one of the reasons, but like, what is the problem that we're trying to solve through our goals? Okay. So again, needs to be specific and explain that pain point. It's not the goals, it's different than the goals. The goals are kind of what we're going to do, what we're going to solve. Our goal is to improve da 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 da. So, Mackenzie, can you do me one favor real quick? Are you there?
Yes.
Could you, as another starting point, go into monday.com and show them the difference on adding somebody to the board versus adding somebody to the workspace?
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Well, that's an example.
I'll unshare my screen and let Mackenzie share.
Okay. So here we go. Can everyone see my screen? Perfect. All right. So here we have your main workspace. You should have a workspace just like this. Here you can see the members of the main workspace. This is obviously a really high number because it's everybody who's on Monday. Just because somebody is a part of your workspace does not mean they can see the boards in it. Depending on how you've set the privacy settings of the boards, they may not be able to see it. So what you're going to do then to ensure that we can grade them properly is you're going to go to your board. So for this one, I'm going to use the example Gantt. And up here where it says invite, you're going to invite people to the actual board. So you see the difference here? Only I'm listed under here because I'm the only person actually on this board right now. So you need to make sure that you're inviting the TAs to your actual boards. Any questions about that? It depends on your privacy settings, Colin. Yes, Amir. And yes, there is a default setting. So when you're creating the board, we talked about this before, where you do new board and you can go private so that you don't have everybody else messing around with your stuff. But if it's private, it means you have to invite everybody to the board that you want working on it. Okay, Shamina. It's fine moving forward. We're just saying from now on, we just need to make sure that we're adding everybody to the board.
So Shamina, I'm going to discuss how we're going to handle those that did not add them to board, because we did discuss last week in class in particular, and Mac was there, of the fact that I gave you guys a chance to go back and add your TA to the board if you hadn't done so. Right? So you actually had an extra chance. We talked about it in class the week we did the boards and reminded you to stay in your own lane and to add people. And then last week again, we reminded you needed to add them to the specific boards, and Mac went through that. Okay. So my suggestion is going to be, I am going to ask the TAs to go and regrade your monday.com if it was unavailable to them, but there's going to be a deduction. So normally they would score that section out of a 5 score. And I'm going to say the max you can get now if it's completed is a 3.5. So those that did it right up front, and like for instance last week did the follow-up and got 5 out of 5, they get 5 out of 5, but you're now getting at least a chance to get a 3.5, which will significantly improve your score based on the overall assignment. Okay. Matt, can you answer the question about they can make everybody an admin, no?
Yeah, you should be able to make everyone an admin. So for instance, when you go into your workspace, where you have your members, this one won't work because it's a public one. We're gonna use Hopeful Goats. Sorry guys, we're gonna use your thing. Let's do it this way. So if you see there's a crown here, which means that Colin is the owner of the board and the admin. When you add other members here, you have the option of selecting the crown for them as well. And when you click the crown or unclick it, it makes them the owner of the board. Don't worry, Colin, you're still the owner of this board. So you can have more than one admin. Under board, one person was admin, so each time we add a board, we need to add everyone and make admin. There should be, if you're making your board private, yes. But if you have the admin settings set up properly in the workspace to start out with, it should automatically transfer over, but just double check and make sure that, yes, you are inviting everyone's on the board. It's better to be safe than sorry. So okay, then yes, double check and make sure you're adding everyone to admin and to the board.
Most of you did pretty well on the goals and objectives. If you, I'm going to, moving forward, ask that the TAs make sure they give you the breakdown by section, but I did start to add, to make it easier for you guys, if you notice on this assignment, specific amounts of grade in each area, so you know what you're getting, you know exactly where I've kind of weighted it. And then they grade it on a qualitative letter grade scale, basically to reflect those things. Another thing that I found that was not good is at the bottom of the assignment, very clearly, it states a couple of things. It states, you'll be creating one document in monday.com, and it should be, and a Word document for your written responses. It should be one cohesive document per team, single space, 12-point font, and then you need to have your references cited if you use references either in APA or MLA. Very clearly, it's supposed to be one document, right? So it should be in one font. It should flow the way the document is supposed to flow, okay? Some of you did not do that, and you were deducted for that. But it was very clearly written in the instructions that that was the case. So take a little bit of time after you've each done your parts, if you're doing it individually, to put them together and make one document, okay? And then you won't lose grades on that. Are there any other questions about specific areas in your assignments? So if you got a 0 on the monday.com part and that was put as a note there, I will ask Tony and Israt to go back through and give you and grade those portions. So expect that that's going to happen if that's your main problem you'd like to be. What would you like me to repeat, Shamina?
What you just said about the documenting?
So the assignment is supposed to be one cohesive document for the entire team, right? Or two.
That's,
Monday.
I mean, one.
Yeah, so it can't be Joey's part and Sammy's part and Isaac's part and Mackenzie's part. It should be one document that covers all of the different sections together. The document should be formatted to look all the same. If you're referencing, all your references should follow the same format. I don't care what format those references are in, just follow one, please. That's all I'm asking, okay?
Oh, okay, thanks.
Yeah.
If
you're going over the word limit, I'm not too concerned as long as you're not writing me a page in replacement of a paragraph, okay? That's kind of where I draw the lines on things like that. For instance, if you're giving me a presentation, because I had this recently, if it's a 10 to 15 minute presentation and you give me a 30-minute presentation, I will deduct. If it's 16 minutes, I don't deduct. Understand, we have a level of reasonability.
Now, I have a question here, Amanda. Assignment 3, we're supposed to use, like, continue from assignment, I'm talking about the monday.com.
Yes.
So WBS, like, we have put down our deliverables and the task, right? So we have to use the Gantt chart on that screen, or it'll be different one, because I was a little bit confused when I see the last class presentation, because our team member probably, I mean, I didn't do it. I mean, one of us did it.
So there's a Gantt template because we're adding more columns now, right? So there's other features you're going to add. So it's easier to go to Max Gantt template, which has all those features already in it, and you're just filling them out.
Okay, after the class, maybe I'll show you if you have a minute.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, we are now going to go over the assignment 3 questions. So we'll start from the top on assignment 3. And I'm just going to pull it up. And so we're going to go over any questions that come up with it, so we make sure that you guys are all on track for assignment 3. So assignment 3, basically you're taking the WBS, and the WBS is your work breakdown structure of all your deliverables and then the task packages that go beyond them, and you're going to put them in a Gantt chart. And when we get to a Gantt chart, we're now starting to schedule and add timing to things. And we're making sure that if there's activities there that require dependencies, that those things have happened. So can somebody tell me what a dependency is? What is a dependency?
So until the first task is finished, you cannot start the second task or third task. So they're
Yeah.
like dependent. One task is finished, the next one cannot.
Exactly. What other kind of dependencies can we have? We don't just have to have that kind, right? So we could have finish to start is what you guys just described. You can have, what is another kind? Start to start, that's right. So in order to start driving, I have to start the car, right? And then we might have finish to finish. So in order to finish my drive, I have to turn off the car, right? Like I have to finish the process to make those things happen. Okay. So those are your dependencies. And you're going to build those in, and you're going to show some relationships between those. And the reason I say use the templates is because the lovely Mackenzie made sure all those things were there. Okay. So you know what you need to put in there. And we describe the amount of tasks that you're supposed to put in. And then I want you to explain on some things why you chose the amount of timing for an activity you did. So what made you decide that that's how long it would take? Is it the amount of labor that's involved? What are the factors that came into play that would say that's what would take that long? Make sure you assign resources. So what are resources in this case of what we're talking about? What are the resources you need to assign? People, right? So now we're assigning people to things. So the people should be assigned to the tasks. So if I'm saying there should be a person on it, and you guys are the project team, who should be assigned to it? Who should be assigned? Ricardo's going to be assigned to all your projects, and he's completing all the tasks from here on out, guys. You should send him a round of applause and a thank you for that. But the team members, right? But guess what I don't want to see, and I will not give you marks for if you put in there. What do I not want to see? I don't want to see you just write team members, because I've seen this before. In Capstone a lot, I see them put this, team. And I'm like, but when we assign a resource, we're making somebody accountable. And if I put the word team there, who's accountable? Who is team? Who is team? It's Ricardo, the team of one. But it's not specific, right? We don't know who team is. It would be like you putting, if there's something on your thing and you're asking a manager or something, it's perfectly fine to put, say, tech manager. If you can spell better than me today, that would be fine. But you know what I don't want to see? I don't want to see this. Why don't I want to see that one? If you just make sure you can see that. Why don't I want to see the bottom one? Why don't I want to see this? Right? It's not specific. Some management of what? What are they managing? Do they even care what we're doing? Okay. So make it specific of a specific manager. The other thing, if it's your GDW project and there's something in there that's required of an action of a faculty member, what I don't want to see is this. Because this is the same kind of thing, right? Because if you put faculty, that could mean that I'm doing it. That could mean that Dr. Hogue is doing it. That could mean James is doing it, Gavin, Alvaro, Bill, and most of them are probably, one of them is going to care about what you need somebody there doing, but the rest of them aren't even going to have a clue what's going on, right? So faculty is too generic. You need to direct us to a person, place, thing, something specific that I have an idea of who it is. Even if it's something like, the lab person, if you put lab tech, I'm okay with that. What I'm not, so that's okay. What I'm not okay with is university staff. Because do you know how many kinds of university staff there are? I'll give you a hint, it's more than one. So we want to be specific enough that we know what's going on.
So I'm sorry,
Yep.
So we have to put down the resources specific to the project, right? We cannot just put it generic, like we cannot just say humans, team managers, faculty. We have to be like maybe
Exactly, like,
Shamina or
like if it's you guys, it could be you guys. If it is a, you know, faculty member or something like that, or it's somebody from an outside organization, it's perfectly fine to say, you know, IT support person or HR manager. I'm fine with that. What I'm not fine with is, so this would be fine. What I'm not fine with is you just putting manager.
because there could be many type of managers.
Yeah, right? So I want you thinking about what goes with your project. If you were actually doing this project, who would be helping you get through it? And if it was some manager, that manager doesn't even know who they are, so they're not going to feel any kind of accountability.
So we can say group number 2 or team members of group 2.
I would outline like go a little bit more specific. Like if you're Shamina, put Shamina, because Shamina is in charge, because Shamina is great at marketing. So that's why I'm assigning her to that task. And then I'm assigning Ricardo to the task of, what's Ricardo going to do? Ricardo, what do you want to do today, buddy? Ricardo is in charge of the task of catching up on ensuring everyone sleeps. Hey, Hedkamar, how did you hear that little rumbling? By the way. Yeah, it's not fun times. Would not be my ideal activity, let's put it that way. Okay. So that is on the resources front. Then we talked milestones. So what are milestones? When Ricardo was getting married, what were his milestones? Yeah, engagement. Right. I think one of the ones we said was RSV, you know, completion of RSVP. What actual wedding day? Right? Key periods of time that kind of get us set to move forward with the future activities. So identify what your milestones are for your project. What's kind of the key big items that say, yeah, we're moving forward and progressing. Okay. And then we're going back to the estimating, and I want you to give me a better estimate than you did last time, where it was just kind of some generic idea in your head. Dr. Hogue now knows that this is an actual assignment if somebody asks for his support, and he won't respond with a poem anymore, I promise. We had a discussion about Dr. Hogue's poem. But you do not have to do all of these methods. I'm just going to ask that you do one of these methods to show what you're doing. Some of you have said, can I show how it could be different depending on the methods? If you're looking for that A+ answer, that 5 out of 5, that's what you need to do to get that 5 out of 5, would be to look at kind of a couple of methods and how they would differ in what they're presenting. Okay. And then you have your make or buy decision. And there's going to be something in your project that you see as a need to either make and have in your possession or buy from an outside service, and you need to describe why you feel that that is an item that you need to either make or buy, depending on what it is. You know, there might be some proprietary stuff there. It might be something you're not good at, and explain why you chose to do that. And those are all the things that are due in this assignment. Does anybody have any questions now that they've got to think about what assignment 3 is? No questions? Okay. So that is assignment 2 discussed. That is assignment 3 discussed. I'm going to go out of order for a little bit and just come down here to number 4 so that we know, and I will post on it. Next week will be a recorded asynchronous lecture, and then I will have some office hours during the week if anybody has any specific questions, but you do not need to come to class next week before 8 a.m. Next week, it will be recorded and posted with you. Okay? So no live lecture. And then just as a fun note, please participate in the next couple of weeks because we have some interesting things happening. So you're going to have no live lecture next week. The week after, I will be back and doing whatever it is we're doing that week. The week following that, Steve Marsh is going to lecture and do his lecture on design thinking. And then actually the week after that, we have an Agile specialist coming from Accenture to do our first discussion on Agile. And then in our last week, we're going to talk about Agile Hybrid. I can't believe it feels like I can see the end, but I think it'll be some cool perspective to get other people's opinions on how things go. Steve is much more technical in nature and technical background than I am, so how he presents design think is different than I teach design think. And having somebody who does Agile, in this case in the telecommunications industry, is different than I would have done Agile in aerospace or automotive. So you're going to get a different perspective. And for those that are thinking that maybe that's a field you want to go into, is like consulting and Agile or something to do with communications, he is totally up and willing to answer any kind of questions that you have. So we should have a few good weeks coming up. All right. I'm going to erase all of this. And we're going to move on to this week's lecture on communication and risk. All right. So we're going to start the slide deck for those that are following along with that. And it starts off with communication planning. And we're going to talk about what communication planning is, some cultural issues. So this relates really kind of closely back to last week and what we talked about a bit. Communication requirements analysis, types of communication, and using a communication plan. So throughout a project, we need to communicate. And as the project manager, who are we going to communicate with? So who does the PM communicate with? With the team, yeah. With who else? Higher ups, yeah, management. External stakeholders. What else we got? All sorts of people, right? They might have to, with the government, with other departments. So there's lots and lots of different people that the PM needs to communicate with. And we talked about this, the sponsor, yeah, definitely. And we talked about this last week. This means they really have to be flexible and they need to understand these people, right? What did we talk about last week in terms of one way we can understand how to best approach these people? What was the technique I talked about a little bit? What was the technique? Understanding people's true, yeah, right, their true colors. So what is this person like? What are their motives and how am I going to motivate them to get done what I need to do or influence them with my decision, right? So communication is going to be really key. We need to tell people why we're doing things, what we're doing, when we're going to do them, so they feel engaged with what's going on. So for each group, we need to understand the purpose of the communication, the frequency of the communication, the format, the amount of time, and the possible need for hierarchy in it. So depending on what it is, maybe there's different levels we have to go through. Anybody know a really easy way or tool that could be used for this? Has all these things in it. What could we use to define the communication? We could actually have a communication plan template. This is probably the simplest. And it would be literally, you know, whatever the item is that needs discussed. So let's say weekly update. And what's included. And just like it talks about here, the format, the timing, who needs it, needs the info, right? I mean, you could have all sorts of different columns, but if you have a plan like this and you know, here's my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 types of communication I'm going to do over this project, then it's just a matter each week of going, oh yeah, I had to do my weekly update emails to everybody, done. Monthly, we're doing a in-person dashboard review. Yep, done, right? If you're an organization that uses Lean, you might have your daily stand-up. And here's who goes to it, and here's what we need for that, done. And then it's just a simple matter of whatever we got to do, we know we got to do it, we know who's involved, and we know the format it takes. And I used to have these all the time for my projects because there would be all sorts of internal and external stakeholders involved. One of the things that we would always have on ours in terms of timing was because I was working in multi-time zone, something about the French don't like 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's not good for them. So we would plan certain things at certain times a day or certain days of the week based on their timing as well to make those things work. So having a communication plan and knowing who's involved, so you know the timing that has to be involved, just a really simple way to do it. As we get to slide 5, a lot of these are really simple topics, simple concepts to think of. So the face-to-face, when I said the monthly meetings, synchronous but not in the same place. A lot of the times if you're working in multi-time zones, in our world we live in now, we're all really good at these hybrid meetings with a video link. Asynchronous communication, so am I just sending an update email? Is something being put on social media? Guys, there's a fun word on slide 6 that I bet none of you have ever even used or thought to use. Anyone know the concept on slide 6 that I think is funny that's there? Many of you probably have never, ever used one because it's not even a thing anymore. What's on slide 6? Yeah, Ricardo. How many of you send out a fax these days? Not very many. On that note, I explained something to somebody yesterday and said the GUI, the graphical user interface of something, was so bad it reminded me of DOS. How many people in the room know what DOS is? Because apparently that really aged me. I feel better now. I feel better. Thanks, guys. I was like, don't you remember when you were a kid and you had to enter the actual, like, you had to know if you were playing MathRabbit that it was mathrabbit.exe, otherwise you couldn't play the game? And the person was like, no, I just clicked an icon. And I said, well. You people in your desktops with your icons. Back when I was a kid, we had to know how to use that command prompt. Okay. So with most of these slides here, we've talked about the communication planning, the who, why, what needs communicated, when. A lot of this is just simply making sure you have a template and you have a plan and you're filling it out. And you'll know what you need to know or how often you need to know it. It's just a reminder of these are the things you need to do. And a lot of what we do, a lot of the reason why we plan, a lot of the reason we use software and have things that have alerts is because we're human. And as humans, we have how many different things going on in how many different ways. And this helps to make sure that we meet the needs of our stakeholders and we keep things progressing. And really, that's what project management is, right? You are managing to make sure something actually happens. Okay. Team meetings. Purpose is to show progress, identify challenges, and get assistance where needed. I think team meetings are really good because it is this chance to say, here's what's got done, here's what I can't get done, do you have a solution to the problem? This is where I think in-person communication as opposed to email and text is good, because sometimes when you say something, it triggers something in somebody else's head that they already know the solution to. Okay. And if you look on slide 11, just like I kind of showed you a diagram there, slide 11 shows you an example of a communication template. We also have a communication template example in Monday.com. Hint, hint, when you're thinking about what our next assignment is. And that is really it for communication for this chapter. I think it's a pretty simple concept. The idea is you're going to communicate with a lot of groups. You're going to have to communicate regularly to share your message. You need to make sure you're sharing the right information with people based on what their need level is and what they want to know, and use the appropriate technology to share that. In our current world, I think the technology has kind of gone really far, really fast. So many people who wouldn't have been comfortable with doing a virtual meeting before or having, a hybrid meeting are now much more comfortable with it. So there's going to be more common technologies you're going to see. All right. We're going to go on to risk management, but before we do, I think I will give us a break right there. So it is 9:18, and I'm going to ask that you're back for 9:25. So you can have 7 minutes, and we'll come back and discuss risk. Okay. And we're back and on to risk management, one of my favorite topics. Okay. Why do we want to plan for risk? Why are we so concerned about what could go wrong? Why are we so concerned about what could go wrong? You can prepare for it, yeah. We can effectively plan for it. So when I talk about risk, I worked in an organization where risk was a big topic, and every part of the organization was part of the risk. So whether or not you want to be a project manager, understanding risk is a big part of not just your work life, but probably your life in general, right? You're going to buy a house one day, hopefully, and something could go wrong, right? And when it comes to something like your house, what could go wrong? You just bought your brand new, maybe not brand new house, but you just bought your first house. Let's say, what could go wrong when you buy your house? You can have a fire. Apparently, you can't have a working marker, but you can have a fire. Yeah. You have a flood. You have a leak. You have electrical issues. Spontaneous combustion. If it's Ricardo, you must really have bad luck, buddy. You're gonna have spontaneous combustion. But there's all sorts of things that could go wrong, right? You could have an appliance break, or the dreaded furnace. Is this making you not want to have a house? You could have, a fence line issue, and you've got to pay to have either a survey done or your fence repaired or something like that, right? There's tons and tons and tons of things that could go wrong with a house. So when you're buying a house, what is one of the things that gets done up front in most cases that's good practice? What would happen? What do you try and do? It's good practice. It hasn't been happening as much yes, right? You might have a home inspection. And that's kind of a risk management technique. Because we can go through and we can see what's going on You know, is there faulty wiring that we see? Has there been mold? So that means there's a leak somewhere that we don't know about. Is there a risk that the appliances, you know, based on the current condition of them, they could maybe set the fire because they're so poorly done. You know, the inspector's going to pull out the furnace for you, and he's going to see your furnace filter has never been changed, right? On the fence line issue, you might have a survey done, or you're going to be looking for a copy of the survey, and then there's insurance that you can get on those kinds of things when you do your house, and those are all kind of risk management things somebody would do buying a house, because what is risk generally going to do to you, or what is it going to cost if it's not planned for? It's going to cost lots of money, right? Either lots of money, or you're going to have to go through insurance. And then what's going to happen to your insurance when you put in an insurance claim? They're going to tell you otherwise, but they're lying. What's going to happen to your insurance? It's going to go up, right? So in a lot of these cases, it's going to cost you money. It's going to cost you time. And do you have that money, right? What is it costing now to buy a house? Is it leaving you lots of cushion room for days in the future to plan for these things? No, there's not a lot of cushion and not a lot of space and room for those things, right? So we want to risk mitigate as much as possible and know what's in front of us and build that maybe into our price, because we're not going to have a lot of extra cash flow. And then you're going to do this thing that I did, and you're going to have kids, and then you're going to have even less cash flow. So you're going to try and risk mitigate up front with your house as much as possible. So mitigation is a technique we would use, and we would use it with any kind of project or anything we're coming up with. When I worked at Safran, they would come in and they'd say, okay, so you, Amanda, know what your deck of suppliers are, or what parts you have to get out this year, what commitments are made. What do you see as risks for the organization at your level? And I would list everything. And I had, we'll call them supplier N, and they were just one big risk in my life. And supplier N would be like 1,000 different risks, but supplier N themselves was just one big risk. And so that would be on my list of things to do. And they would and then I would say, you know, other risks that I would have was titanium shortage on part XYZ. I might have, what other kind of issues would I have? If I knew one of my suppliers was unionized and their contract was coming due, I would say XYZ union contract coming due. All sorts of different things, but I would list out based on my deck of parts and what I needed to build, where we were on things. If I knew that my pipeline was delayed for something previously and I was going to have to try and bring my pipeline forward, I would say, you know, pipeline delay 2 months out. And there's ways we can fix this. There's ways that we can fix a lot of these things. Know that this can never be fixed. This is like the thing, this is the reason I was employed. But there were many things within that I would try and fix. And so I would say to my boss, okay, here's my 1, 2, 3, 4 risks for this year. And every other employee on my team would do the same thing. And then we would go to our boss, and our boss would go, okay, Amanda, you are going to manage supplier N, and you're just going to let me know if anything is going to go wrong. Titanium shortage, so I wasn't a material buyer. I just needed titanium for my parts. So we're going to send this out to purchasing to help control, and that's going to go on their risk list. XYZ union contract coming due. He'll probably say to me that I would manage this and that I just need to give an update at date X and make sure we know what's going on. If this was going to be a bigger issue, he might say to me, okay, we're going to push this also over to purchasing to find us an alternative source. And then this pipeline delay 2 months out might be a bigger thing than me based on what the situation was. And he's going to take that then and put as a manager and put that on his manager's list and have it go up. And then what would happen from there is he would sit down with the director and go through all theirs and they would come up basically at each level to say, here's all the risks at Safran Landing Systems for Ajax, and here's the level that we feel they're going to be dealt with, and basically here's our mitigation plan, or here's what everybody is in charge of finding a mitigation plan or deciding on what we can accept as risk at each level. Okay, so that is a very quick view of what we would do for risk at Safran. Just hitting a button so my screen doesn't die on me. But that is something that you as team members, when you would get a project, would do, is you would go out and you would say, okay, here's a project, here's what we're going to do. What do you see as the risks in each of the areas of things that could happen? What are you going to be able to manage on your own? How are you going to manage it? And what do you need help from me? And then I'm going to do the same. What do I need help from my manager or from the larger organization on? And that's really what we're trying to do with risk management, is understand what could go wrong. We're not saying it's all going to go wrong, because it might not. You know, supplier N might deliver one day on time. Probably not today, but one day. And that might not be a risk to our supply chain. But these are all the things we foresee could go wrong. My good friend Neil, him and I had talked, because he's a senior vice president at a financial company. And he said to me, you know, Amanda, we predicted that there could be a pandemic. We did never predict a global pandemic on this scale. But as somebody who has to plan for risk in a financial industry, what happens if they don't plan well for the risk? And you have all sorts of other people's money. How's that going to go? Not very well, right? So you need to have backup plans and be doing all those kinds of things in the background and try and mitigate as much as possible, because you have all sorts of people's money and they're going to expect that money. Okay. So risk management, very important in your life, important in your job, and definitely important in a project, because it's what's going to decide a lot of the times if we're going to get it done on time and on cost. Because if those risks happen, those things are probably not going to happen. Okay. So the risk management process, how do we manage risk? We're going to plan risk management, which is what we just did here. And the technique that I used of us coming together and kind of managing as individuals and then at the team level and up and up and up, that would be our plan on how we plan risk management. You're going to identify the risks. So we each identified what all our risks are. Then you're going to evaluate the risk. What is the likelihood the risk is going to happen? So what was the likelihood for us that we were going to have titanium shortages with everything that was going on in Russia? Pretty good. How are we going to deal with that? And then plan risk response. So are we going to accept the risk? Are we going to try and mitigate the risk? Are we going to try insurance as a way to kind of mitigate risk per se, or transfer it, right? Because if I have risk every day that I could get in a car accident. And if I don't get it, and if I don't have car insurance, what is the risk to me if an accident happens? That I'm going to have no car and be out a lot of money. What's the risk to me? High, low, don't know. Every day I get in the car, what's the risk to me that if I did? Pretty high, right? And cars are not exactly a cheap venture either. What else is not a cheap venture if I was to get in an accident? What could happen to me? What else could happen to me? Medical expenses, or if I'm at fault, I could get sued, right? Everybody's always looking for the money that I just don't have. So, and anybody know what like the average lawsuit is on a car accident? Is it low or high? It's big, right? And I'll give you a hint. I work in public education. I don't have that kind of money to just be like, whatever. So I transfer that risk by having insurance. Okay. And you can actually get insurance for a lot of different things. Can you guys see that color very well? Apparently not. I think that's different. So I would get insurance, and that would allow me to transfer the risk to someone else. Okay, so that is one way I could handle it. But this is basically what we're doing. We're planning on how we're going to look at the risk. We're identifying what the risks are. We're evaluating the likelihood the risk is going to happen, and then we're going to plan the risk response. So if we don't think the risk is that high, we might be willing to just accept it because it's not that big of a deal to us. If it does happen, maybe it's just an annoyance, or maybe it's very unlikely to happen. But if it's something that can have a very detrimental impact to us, we're going to do something to try and either mitigate or work around. Maybe we're not going to do that task that puts us at risk. We're going to do something else. Okay. So risk by definition is an uncertain event or a condition. If it occurs, it can have a, get this, a positive or negative effect. So if it had a positive effect, what might we want to do? Instead of mitigating it, we might want to what it? Run right into it. Yeah, we might want to exploit it. So sometimes things like currency, we can see them going in our favor and we're like, oh, we're going to buy more because we're going to make money on the currency exchange, right? So we might want to exploit that opportunity. Or we might come into something where we've found a really good deal on buying something, and while we might not need it all ourselves, we know we could sell part of it off to somebody else and make money off of it. So instead of being a negative risk, it's actually an opportunity, and we're going to look for ways to exploit it. So when you're thinking risk, don't always think negative, okay? There are risks that are good, and there are lots of times too that we can even change a negative risk into a positive by looking on ways to deal with it. Okay. So a risk may have one or more causes and one or more impacts, but usually there's at least one cause and one impact that's going to come with it. Project risk, more than the sum of the identified risks, there's an overarching risk as well, right? There is a risk if all of these things happen that maybe we're late to market and we miss the boat. Or, you know, the sums of a bunch of them happen and our cost of goods sold makes it no longer viable for the product overall. So we have individual level risk, and then we have this bigger risk. And that's why we need to understand the picture of both. What can be done about risk? So first of all, we can avoid the risk. And if I'm getting in, and if I have a car and I want to avoid the risk of a car accident, what am I going to do? Walk? Yeah, yeah. I'm not going to drive, right? Maybe is what I'm going to do. How am I going to transfer the risk? We talked about having car insurance. Mitigating, reduce the probability of an impact. So with that, when it comes to a car accident, what might we do to make that work? How could we mitigate the risk on a car accident? What would one way be? What kind of precautions could we take? How about not driving in rush hour? Not driving 400 series highways. I mean, they're not maybe the best solutions in the world, but they would definitely mitigate the probability of our risks happening, right? And then accept the risk, accept that it could happen. So we are just going to go on and let the fact that the accident could happen, because whatever that is less of an impact to us than what the cost would be of the other things. So there's the 4 techniques really that can be done about risk. We can avoid, we can transfer, we can mitigate, and we can accept. So when we're thinking about how we're going to handle the risk, we have some categories of thought patterns. So what is our risk, our appetite for risk? Can somebody explain what I mean by appetite for risk and what that would be? Ricardo is happy for Ricardo. What would be an appetite for risk? Risk tolerance, similar, yeah. Willingness to take on, but appetite for risk is kind of this whole idea of anticipation of reward. So, and a lot of these concepts I'm going to give you are kind of similar, but this whole appetite for risk, I think like guys trading in Bitcoin right now, right? Risk could be high, you're going to lose a lot of money, but your appetite for risk is higher because what could the value be that comes out of this? Somebody was telling me if I bought Bitcoin instead of like penny candies back in the day, how much money I would have now, and it was redonkadonk. Right? But what is your appetite for risk? And different things affect people's appetite for risk. Last week, we talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you are low on the pyramid of hierarchy of needs, what is your appetite for risk going to be like? If you're down here in like, probably a lot lower, right? Because you are just trying to get through the day and be safe and have a house over your head and those kinds of things. But if you're up here in the self-actualization phase, for many people, their risk adversity or their appetite for risk is going to be a lot higher because that's where they're kind of playing in their mindset and their game, and that's how they're getting to the next level. Okay. Another one on that front, and it's going to tie also into tolerance. When you look at pension plans and the risk versus reward, what happens as you get older to your risk that you're putting in? As you get older and you're getting closer to needing your pension. And I'm not that old yet, guys. I know you think I'm old, but I'm not that old that I'm at this risk yet. Does anybody know what happens to the pension as you get older? Your appetite for risk on that. It's actually the opposite, Ricardo. So as you get older, you have less appetite for risk, which means less for reward, because you're closer to actually needing the money. Right? Where I'm like 30 years out still. So what happens today, I can take a higher level appetite of risk because I've got a longer time in which to compensate for that. Okay? Does that make sense? It's like you guys with an assignment. If you guys are putting a game together, or you're doing something, or you're putting a marketing plan or anything together, what is your appetite for risk going to be near the beginning versus the night before it's due to do a big change? When is your appetite for risk probably going to be higher? Right? Probably going to be higher at the beginning when you have more time to recover from it. But the night before, you're like, I just need to get this done. I just need to get this submitted in. I need to get this done now, right? And so you just want to execute what you have and hope that you have as little problems or as little risks that come to fruition in that time period. Risk tolerance, the degree or amount of risk that an organization or individual is able to withstand. And then risk threshold, point at which the stakeholder organization is no longer willing to accept the uncertainty. So maybe it gets to a certain level where it's very likely something's going to happen, and they're like, no, if there's a 70% chance, now we need to change our minds and do something about it. Okay. So how do you plan for risk? I told you how we did it at Safran. But if you go to slide 22, it gives you kind of an idea of how you could do it in terms of inputs. So your project plan, your project charter, stakeholder register, you're going to take all your information and you're going to take some expert judgment and some meetings with people, just like I kind of had at Safran. And then the output is really going to be this risk management plan of here's the risks, here's the level they're being handled at, here's, the likelihood they're going to happen, Apparently I can't spell. And then here's our technique or mitigation. Okay. And you would have them all in a chart that's measured for you. And then everybody can see what's going on. And the nice thing about this is if a person changes and takes over a role and they're new to it, so they don't know the intricacies, they have that risk measure already and they have an understanding of what could go wrong, so they can help to start anticipating those things. So you would update this as the project goes along. As you have more information, you would update the risk register to show how your risks are doing, or if there's been a change in terms of how you could accept them, if they're going to happen. You know, you get halfway through and you have a better idea of how things are going. Maybe something comes off altogether because it's no longer a risk, and maybe new things come on because new things happen in the market, right? Many projects I'm sure started pre-COVID with nobody ever imagining we were going to be at home for what feels like my lifetime. But that would then have to be managed in on things now on how we're going to execute, especially if it's something where people have to go out and physically do it. So we can have qualitative risk, and that's really this concept of information and ideas and concepts. And then you have the quantitative risk, and that's where we're saying, what is the likelihood of this risk and what is the impact of it? So we might have it that the risk X, the likelihood of it happening is like 10%, but guess what? If risk X happens, it's going to hit us $1 million. So we have to budget, in this case, for like 10, we would probably in this case budget 10% of $1 million as part of our risk budget, and add up all our risk totals, and maybe we have 5 million total for the project, okay? But then as we go through, if this 10% risk actually happened, we're in trouble in a hurry, because we got to figure out how we're coming up with $1 million when we only budgeted in 100,000 because we weren't likely that that one was going to happen. Okay, so I want you guys thinking about risk and your projects. And I know many people in the class are not here, so I'm going to ask you to do this on an individual basis. I'm going to give you 5 minutes, and I want you to think of some risks that could be associated with your project. Mac, can you create a Dropbox for me? It'll be an individual Dropbox. Mackenzie, are you there? Oh. Okay, there will be a Dropbox, and it will be a 1% bonus mark for those that do it. I want you to think of 5 risks that could be associated with your project and the best method out of these 4 things that you would use for them. Okay, so 5 risks for your project and the best method for them. Okay, we're going to come back and talk about that. I'm going to give you I'll just give you 10 minutes. I'm going to give you till 10:05 to do this. I'll create the Dropbox right now. So go ahead and create it either in a Word document, or you can just do directly copy and paste into that Dropbox, the 1% bonus. But I want you to think about your project in your head. Think about 5 possible risks. Just write out what the risks are. It doesn't have to be fancy. And then would you avoid, transfer, mitigate, or accept? And then we're going to come back and you're going to explain to me some of these and why you chose what you chose. Okay? Steph, I'm not really concerned with that. I just want you to, if you can put what your project team number is, just so that it's identified if somebody wants to go back and see what it is. I just want you literally to list risks 1 to 5, what they are, and then what method you're using to solve them. And then we're going to come back and talk about it. Okay. So we will come back at 9:05, or sorry, 10:05.